And you'll always be looking at her.
Great.
Camera's all set. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, what is your name and class year?
I'm Trish Garcia, Monet, Burk, class of 92.
Hey, Trish, can you do me a favor? Can you spell your name?
Sure. Trish Garcia-Monet. And I guess there's also Burk. So my second husband wants that in there. That's good.
Okay, so prior to Princeton, did you attend public or private school?
Prior to Princeton, I came from a public school in Houston, and I was recruited. Sorry, should we go ahead and tell how we came here and stuff?
Go for it.
I didn't know what the whole question was, but yeah, prior to coming to Princeton, I came from a public school in Houston. One of the student recruiters, Herman Lara, class of 90, came to my school. I didn't really know what Princeton was. I had heard of it, just like I had heard of Harvard, but they pulled me out of my classroom to come and talk to him. And at the end of his presentation, I just thought to myself, there's no way. There's no way that I would ever do this or get in, but he did not let me leave that room without putting an application in my hand. And he told me just to think about it. And I kept that application. Christmas vacation came around, and I decided, why not? I might as well fill it out. And it was very different than today. It was all paper, typewriter. And luckily back then they weren't as strict with the deadlines, because some of my teachers were surprised and shocked that I was even doing that. And but they filled out their letters, and so much more we could say. But I got in, so.
Okay, great. While you were at Princeton, where did you live?
I lived in several places. While I was at Princeton, my freshman and sophomore year, I lived in Butler College. Those dorms no longer exist. They were waffle ceiling dorms. That was my freshman year. My sophomore year, I lived in Patton Hall with 6 other students. That was a really diverse group of students I lived with. And my junior year, I lived in what was considered the slums in 1901. My senior year, I lived in Laughlin.
Okay. What was your initial impression of Princeton?
I first came to Princeton the very first time during April hosting. And at that time, they had 2 separate April hostings. They had minority April hosting, and then they had what I would say was regular April hosting. And I somehow had gotten the invitation to both. So I decided if we were going to spend the money, because it was a huge sacrifice for my family for me to fly up here, I was going to do both. And I started out the week with regular April hosting, and I stayed with some students, and it was a nice experience. I went and sat in on some classes. I think I went to a soccer game or something like that, and I was thinking, this is an amazing university. It looks like what a school should look like, but I still didn't quite feel, I still wasn't quite sure whether this was a place for me. So as the weekend started, they transferred me over to a student who would host me, Millie Mejias, who would host me for minority April hosting. And it was in the course of that weekend when we were hanging out at the Third World Center, there was a huge party, and I was helping set up tables, and I just began to immediately feel like this community was a family. And it was in those few moments that I was like, this is where I have to be. And even then, it was like sad for me, because I didn't know, would my family be able to do this for me? But I knew then that I really wanted to go to Princeton. And then when I was walking, my first day during April hosting, I had worn a cool matching sweatsuit. It had Texas written across the front, because I was going to go to UT. So it had a big Texas thing on it. And I went to a class on the Wife of Bath, because we'd been studying that in high school. And I went to the precept and I was like answering questions, not knowing that a high schooler should probably have just sat and watched. But the last day I was in Princeton on campus, I hear someone yelling like, "Hey, Miss Texas, and I'm all like, Miss Texas is here, what? And I'm looking around, and it was actually the professor from that precept. And he stopped me and he remembered me and he asked me what I thought about Princeton. And he was like, "You really should come here." And it just, that struck me too, that faculty would be so, sort of engaged with their students that he would even remember me and then encourage me with those few words. I knew Princeton would be a very different experience than anywhere else.
Okay. Was it easy or hard to adjust to college life?
It was challenging for me. I was in a program called the Freshman Summer Orientation Program, and that's a program, it was for athletes and for some students who might not be coming from a neighborhood or an academic, high school that was like Princeton. So we came for 3 weeks before classes started, and we took classes, we met each other, we met professors and administrators, and that, helped me adjust. But back then, I came from a very close family, and it was a single mom and me and my brother. And back then there were no cell phones, there was no FaceTime. So when she put me on the plane in Houston to come here, I knew I wasn't going to see her again until probably Thanksgiving, possibly October break if I was lucky. And those were there were some days it was quite lonely. And to talk to them, it was, okay, Sunday at 6:00, go use the one phone on campus in Stanhope where you could do long distance phone calls. We didn't even have long distance in our rooms. So it was standing in line to talk to my mom for just a few minutes. And I don't even know if it was every week. It's been 30 years. So at first that was challenging, the homesickness. My friends from EPSOP helped with that because they quickly became my family. And even just, and maybe this will be another question, that even just, being Latino and being here and the food being different, not necessarily hearing Spanish as often. In some ways, feeling like it was a time of, talking about affirmative action and the feeling that, you wondered whether or not people felt like you should be here. So that adjustment was different for me as well. I can stop. You want me to stop? So.
Okay, so the microphone is so close to you that it doesn't pick up that. See if it's right above your, yeah.
Okay.
Also, if there's a little ripple on your shirt, yeah, right there. Perfect, thank you.
I could go on. There's so much about
Can you
the
pick it
adjustment.
up? Can you pick it up from the food is different, the opportunity to talk Spanish? Can you pick it up from there?
Yeah,
This sounds
sure.
fantastic.
Sure. So being in Princeton, it was a time when there weren't a lot of Latinos here. So just even the foods that we would, have access to, it was not, you were not getting tortillas in the grocery store or really, there was no Mexican food. There was one restaurant off campus that was not really Mexican food, if you ask me. So that cultural connection, was difficult to not have. And then also there was this sense that we needed to be an example of Latinidad for people, or to explain, that we should be here. And one example I'll give is and she meant no harm by it, but it was very early in freshman year. One of my hallmates was like, "Oh, you're Mexican. Is your mom a housekeeper?" And I, was a little bit taken aback, and I was like, "No, she's a bookkeeper." and I knew she didn't mean any harm by it. She just literally said, I'd never known anyone Hispanic who wasn't a housekeeper before. And I'm still friends with this person, all these years later. I just explained it, but it was those kinds of things that we ran into pretty much on the daily. So that was, my first year, and for me, for my first year, I came into Princeton at a time where there was a lot of division within the Chicano caucus. I went to the Chicano caucus because I thought these are probably going to be, kids like me. But it was funny because we were in I was in Fred Hargadon's first class, and the admissions preferences were slightly different. So the kids who had been here prior to my class were from slightly different backgrounds than what my class was. And so when I first went to Chicano caucus, I was a little bit not quite brown enough. I didn't speak Spanish all the time. My parents were not migrant workers. I wasn't quite brown enough. But outside of the caucus, I definitely wasn't just white. I wasn't going to associate that way. And so I stuck with it because I knew that was a place I wanted to be. And the caucus had come to a point in time where I think a lot of the officers were resigning, the upperclassmen. So as a first-year student, I was elected co-chair of the Chicano caucus my very first semester. And that is really what started to shape me and my Princeton experience, because in being with those students and a part of that group, I began to see sort of the pain that was present for Latino students at that time. That there was a lot of things a university could be doing to make things better, and they weren't. So in that second semester of my freshman year, we had a huge sit-in in Nassau Hall. And it was not just Latino students, it was, all the minority students, it was the women's groups, it was this amazing thing. And I began to realize, wow, we can really institute change. And that's when I began sort of my time at Princeton, where that year I ran for I was like, how do we get to be part of the process of change and making policy changes in the university? And it was, you join the committee of the Princeton University community. And I'm like, well, how do we do that? And they're like, you have to run for it. So I ran for that as a freshman and was elected to that body. My sophomore year, I ran for president of the undergraduate student government, and I was the first and I believe only Latina to ever have that position. And it was in that position that I really got to see what the needs were of students all around the campus. And being elected to that, I could only do that by bringing together Latino students, Black students, Asian students. And I went to the Women's Center, like bringing all those groups together on campus is what allowed me to be elected to that position. And so I felt a real commitment to all of those groups. If we're having another sit-in, I guess we need to make copies in the USG office, things like that. But being in that position, it also gave me access to administrators and professors and experiences that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Breakfast at the president's house, or speaking to the wives of the class of 1940 or whatever, and that led to my commitment there. Led to me. I took a semester away because it was a lot. It was a lot being, the Latino voice on campus every day, day in, day out. There were times when I wished I could unzip from my Latino-ness and just be a student, because it was a lot. And so at that point, I took a semester away and came back as a senior to write my thesis, because I knew if I didn't graduate, all of the activism and all of the relationships I had built, they'd be for nothing if I didn't actually get the degree. So.
Okay. What was your major, and were there many other Latino students in your major? Did that play a role in the choice of your major?
I was in the Woodrow Wilson School. At that time, it was called the Woodrow Wilson School, and it's a School of Public and International Affairs. There were not a lot of Latinos in there, but I knew that was the major that I wanted. A couple of my key friends also were in that major. one of my best friends, Cincy. I'm sure there will be a video from her. Cincy was in that major. A few other folks were in that major. And for me, I knew policy was what I was interested in and what I needed to be doing. So that was my major.
How would you characterize the intellectual atmosphere?
Clearly Princeton's an amazing place. While I was an undergraduate, we had what I would consider at the time a lot of Latino professors. We had Arcadio Diaz, Jorge Flor de Alva, several others, so we could take classes where we could learn about ourselves. Like, to me, that was amazing that I could see myself in these classes, learn more about the Latino population in the U.S. That to me, and those professors, I felt like encouraged us, more so. It might not have actually been more so than other professors, but it felt like it. It felt like they were rooting for us. Like when I was elected student body president, Jorge Flor de Alva contacted the vice president of communications for the university. And he was like, hey, do you realize this is a huge deal? She's the first and only one. Are you going to send out a press release? And then, of course, the university was like, oh, yeah, of course we are. And they did, but would they have had that professor not happen to know, happen to say that for me? So yeah, and it was nice just to have those professors on campus because, again, going back to the cultural support and the food, to go to their house, to hear the music, to sit down for a meal, with other Latino students, with them in their homes, that was just really important for us just to get through and to get by because we weren't going home. We weren't seeing our families. So if we had to choose, I know for me, if I had to choose a meal out at the Alchemist and Barrister with some administrator or a meal at my Latino professor's house with his family, I would probably choose the meal at his house with the family. So that just helped me get through Princeton.
Okay. And what was your thesis topic and how did you find that experience?
My thesis topic was the representation of Latinos in Congress, and what that was a participant observation study. I followed, being from Texas, I followed my congressional representative around all summer, the summer before my senior year, and basically just looked at, were there Latinos at his meetings? Was he taking meetings with Latinos? What were the concerns? Like, what kinds of things was he working on? And really found that, it wasn't that great, but it was, it was an amazing experience for me to do that and then also learn more about Latinos in Congress as a part of that experience. And I went on to graduate school in political science, where I learned about my topics there were political parties and how important it was. Early voting was just starting then, so learning about the importance of the parties and organizing early voting, and that was what my thesis was.
And were your closest friends during your undergraduate years of a similar background than yours?
Yes. So my friends at Princeton, I very much considered myself, and I think others probably say this too, as a sort of a bridge maker because, and to this day, I'm someone who makes relationships across different groups. Because when I came to Princeton, you were either Latino, hanging out with your friends in the caucus and Acción or Latino Task Force, or you weren't, and you weren't. It was a choice that was made: who you sat with at lunch, who you hung out with on weekends, what parties you went to. There wasn't a lot of crossing over. It was sort of you hung out with your Latino group, or you weren't. And so for me, I felt like my roommate wasn't Latino, my hallmates, but I felt like by having these relationships that weren't within the Latino community, it helped me see, like, how are these other students being acclimated? What are they, these are the folks that I'm probably going to have to work with when I grow up, they're going to be in the boardrooms, they're going to be in these places, and I want to be comfortable around them and have these friendships. So I was like, I need to do both. And that's what I'm saying. At first, when I would go to these caucus meetings, they were like, hey, you're not really brown. You don't speak Spanish all the time. You're not hanging out with us exclusively. And I had to, prove myself. Yes, I'm here. I am Chicana. I just also, am building these other friendships. And that also, when I went to run for student body president, I couldn't have won if I had only hung out with the Latino groups and no one else. And so for me, building all of those bridges, it was personally important to me, but I also felt like I needed to, because how would the non-Latino students and administrators and all that, how would they know what it's like to be Latino on campus, or even what it's like to be Latino in the world, if I wasn't having these relationships with them and getting to know them on a personal level, and then get to a point where we could share these things. So to me, it was very important that my friendships spanned across the university.
How did Princeton affect your subsequent life and career?
Gosh, this one will be, how did Princeton affect my life? This will be one where I will try very hard to hold back tears. I always have said, the person who recruited me has always said that Princeton, Princeton's in the life-changing business. And I love Princeton. I bleed orange and black. Because Princeton, I didn't think I would cry this much. I told myself I wouldn't do it. Princeton definitely changed my life. Every aspect of my life since the moment I came to this campus has in some way been touched by Princeton, by the relationships that I built, by the experiences I had. When you're going through it, you don't realize you're here for 4 years, and you think that this is sort of, while you're there, that's it. But I have come to realize over time that those relationships, and some of them are, yes, my Latino relationships, but also, my women friends, my black friends, my non-Latino, my non-minority friends. In my life, when the biggest things in my life have happened, the people that I immediately call, the people who are there to support me and cheer me on and give me advice and, pick me up, they are the folks that I met at Princeton. And I think about Princeton taught me that I had a voice, that I could speak out, for people and share things about my life, and I wouldn't have had that. Even being student body president, yes, it was just this amazing experience, but really, it taught me that I could work with people for change. It taught me that I could speak out. And those are some of the skills that I use today. But it definitely changed my life. Like I said, the relationships, for sure. There's been jobs I've had. I'm going to need a tissue. That's all right. I'm fine.
Oh, I'll go get some.
Fine. No. It's all right. I mean, it's fine. We can just edit out all
Yeah, because this might live forever, and we want to make sure.
Okay. Oh, I have a water right there. I'm sorry, I had to. Just imagine that. Trish is getting emotional.
It happens.
I know, right? I'll probably start over. I know, right?
I'm like,
Let's go ahead and cut.
I
Let's
thought-
cut.
All right.
So one of the other incidences that I've spoken about where it's where Princeton has impacted my life, I think about in 2017 when Harvey came to Houston, and we got the phone call that we had to evacuate as soon as we possibly could. And I was a Texan. I'd been there for years. I never evacuated when hurricanes would come. I was like, we don't do that. And immediately, I got a phone call from one of my classmates, Renee, and she's like, you need to get out. You need to get out right now. And I was like, having her tell me that, I knew it was true. She had been through Katrina, and so the fact that she would pick up the phone and know that to tell me this thing, she probably knew I wanted to stay. And I went to my closet, and I was sort of in shock about, like, what do I need to take with me? What should I, what's important to me in this whole house? Like, nothing, right? But I go to my closet, and I have my section of orange and black clothing, as most alumni do. And that's what I grabbed. Like, I grabbed this jacket. I grabbed the buttons that came with it. I grabbed my senior beer jacket. And I just thought, if I have no other clothing and nothing else, this was who I was. These were the people, as I was driving away from my house, like, these were the people that I knew, would cheer me on, would open their homes to me if I needed it. And so that's what I grabbed as I left my house, evacuating from Harvey. And thank goodness nothing happened to my home, but it sort of told me who I was, that's what I grabbed when I walked out the door. One other thing about Princeton being in the life-changing business. I've done a lot for, Princeton's been a huge part of my life for over 30 years. This is my 30th reunion. I was, like I said, I chaired the caucus. I was student body president. I was president of the Association of Latino Princeton Alumni for 10 years. I've done interviews since for 35 years or 30 years. And my son applied to Princeton last year. And in my heart, he'd been to all the reunions. He has pictures of himself. I had a picture of him as a baby next to the Tigers. We submitted that with his interview. Did I want my son to be part of this experience? Did I want him to come to reunions with me, play football for Princeton? Like, all these things that I had always wanted to share with him. But I also knew when he applied that Princeton had changed my life already. It had changed his life already. And so, and being an interviewer, I knew how, slim the chances were, but I had him apply anyway, right? And he wanted to apply. And so when he didn't get in, there was a split second there, and maybe it was a day, where, I was hurt, and I thought to myself, gosh, I've given so much to Princeton. And then I started thinking about how much Princeton had done for me in my life, in his life. And I told him, I said, Princeton knows they've changed our lives already. They see it all the time. And it's time, if you did not get in because it was time for Princeton to change the life of another family, then I was totally in support of that, because that's what Princeton does. So,
I love that.
Yeah.
sorry. That's okay.
I love that.
That was good.
Yeah. There's a strong bite there.
Oh, I think they want me to talk about, like I said, the history of Alpha and
Okay, and then
So,
yeah, I
but
mean,
if you have
after
more questions you need to ask, then if you want
no,
to ask
actually,
them.
we're at, like I said, like you've been hitting like a lot of them without me even asking, so I'm not gonna
Okay.
ask. You can talk about Alpha, and then just in general, like what you love, like maybe
A few more things.
and then we're good.
Okay, and hopefully you'll like mix all these things up, because I know I have a lot to say. So, okay. Whew. So, Alpha and the history of Alpha. When I was an undergraduate student, there was a Latino Alumni Association of Princeton, and Nelly Gorbea was in charge of that, and she would come on campus. I remember she'd have receptions right outside of McLean House, and Latino students would come, and we could meet some other alumni. There were a reception behind West College during reunions, and it just meant so much to me to be able to see other Latino who had come before and hear their stories and know that they made it through. So when I graduated, I worked with Nellie, and I was, I believe, the treasurer. It's been a little while, I can't remember. And then she asked me if I would take it over, just for a year or two. So I said sure. And then, I was the president of, or co-president, depending on the year, for about a decade. And during that time, we changed the name to the Association of Latino Princeton Alumni, really because the university was wanting to line up all the organizations to have similar names, and we had ABPA already, so we had ALPA, there was A for P, and so we changed the name. We began to be thinking about what the role of that organization should be. What is its role in terms of how it interacts with students and what we should be for them? What are we for alumni? And one of the main difficulties for me in the 10 years that I was president of that organization, and even now as I think about this, is that again, when students are at Princeton, typically they are either all in with the caucus or Acción. I know there's other organizations, more recent ones that I'm blanking on the names of, but they're all in for those organizations and not necessarily doing other extracurriculars or building other relationships. So when it comes time and folks graduate, you've kind of got two sets of Latino alumni. You've got Latino alumni who are all in for Princeton, but they never they may never have done something with Acción or the caucus. So why are they going to join ALPA? What's in it for them, and why do they need to do that? So it was difficult to get. And then you have another set of alumni who perhaps were all in on the caucus and Acción, but their experiences here may have been so painful that the last thing they want to do is come back to Princeton and give money to Princeton. And they definitely are not bleeding orange and black. They're bleeding, but not orange and black. And so it was kind of a challenge to get new members, to get new officers, to get, honestly, people to financially contribute to ALPA. And I began to sort of, wonder about what needs to change for us to change that experience to where we were, an organization that people wanted to be in, or how do we change their experience on campus to where you can be in those Latino organizations or not, and yet you still want to be part of the Latino alumni community at Princeton. So I feel like those were some of the struggles that I saw, and I still continue to think about, because even for me, I still love ALPA, but I've been on my class reunions committee for, many reunions. I do interviews for alumni schools. I'm on annual giving. So Princeton has done enough for me. And I was hurt too. There was a time when I left Princeton, when I graduated, that I thought, I'm just done. I've given y'all a lot. Like I was tired too. I was tired of being that Latino voice on campus all the time, and I was never going to come back. But it turns out the first time I married a Princetonian who also went to Princeton, and we decided that we wanted to get married in the chapel. We wanted to...
Can you say that, and I thought I was never going to come back one more time, because I think this stepped on you.
Oh,
Yep.
sorry. Okay. So, yes, I was hurt. I was hurt too. But I was going to marry, I was marrying another Princetonian who was class of 93, and we decided that we would get married in the chapel, in the university chapel. We wanted to reclaim a space that had been painful, that had been difficult and been challenging, and I just thought to myself, we graduated too. Why aren't we embracing all that Princeton alumni experience has to offer? So we thought about, we'll get married in Princeton and we'll reclaim that space as a happy place for us. And we did. And I've been, active ever since. And I think, again, for me, Princeton has been a very large part of my life since I was 18 years old, and I think it always will be. And you know, I bleed orange and black.
One more thing. There was that one part we were saying that you did so much for the school and that you didn't think you were going to come back. If I could get a clean one of that, because I think this chair stepped on your words a little bit.
Sure.
Yep.
So even though, you know, I had done so much for Princeton, I had, you know, run the Chicano caucus, I had been student body president, I was on the council for Princeton University Community and just on tons of committees. You know, I was done. I was hurt. I was through. I felt like they hadn't done enough for certain communities, and I think I was done, and I wasn't going to come back, and I wasn't going to give. So.
And then this is the last closing, and I know you said I bleed orange and black. Do you have another ending, just in case we use another
Sure.
final closing?
I do want to
sentiment?
share one other thing, and again, it's not on script, but I want to share one other thing. When I think about Princeton, and I think about how it has been intertwined in my life, it has also been like deeply intertwined in my story and my faith story. When I came to Princeton, I wasn't sure. I thought it was going to be, you know, so difficult. I wasn't sure, you know, how I got in or how I was going to make it. But, you know, God did that and gave me that grace. And I thought being at Princeton was difficult. Then I thought that being student body president was difficult. I had to go and give speeches and give talks and whatever. And I thought, oh, I don't have it in me to do that. But through my faith, and a faith that became very strong while I was here at Princeton, I thought it was before. And then I was, you know, president of the Alumni Association, and I would speak to people about diversity and other things, and I thought that was difficult. But then my first marriage ended, like I said, in a very, let me stop just a second, if I want to share that. Do I want to share that?
It's a final sentence, like a nice closing.
Yeah, I want to say like, maybe I won't. But
Does it go
Okay.
with the closing?
yeah, I guess I'll close with just saying, you know, Princeton gave me a voice to tell my story because my story is crazy. But, all right, so we'll scratch all that part, but I'll do it short. I'll just do one sentence. So I love Princeton. I love Princeton because it gave me a voice. It's not only been part of my story, but it's given me the tools and the support system and the love to be able to tell my story.
Perfect.
Okay.
Good job.
Thank you.
I was like, let me
Cut in.